everybody. It is Becky Pearson with Pivot Point of View, and I'm joined with my co-host Destri Millsap and our very special guest, Gimmie Joe Jansonius. She has been on here before, and I think she's our first repeat guest. So honors to you there, Gimmie Joe. Welcome to the podcast again.
Thanks for having me back. It's exciting. I was so thrilled when you reached out. I'm like, this is great. Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, no, it was a great conversation last time, and I have no doubt today is going to be any less phenomenal. I think it's going to be even better. I have a feeling this one might be one of my favorite yet. So, today, what we're going to talk about is the power of mentorship and how that plays a part in today's world. It really came to light over the past week or so with the assassination of Charlie Kirk and his message of mentoring the young people in the United States and really across the world. There are people all over the world that follow the things that he talks about. So I wanted to visit with you guys because you both have a lot of influence on young people, and you both have very strong faith, and I think this will be just a great conversation about how we adults can help mentor younger people, how we can speak boldly in our beliefs and not be afraid to really stand up for what we think and feel. And yeah, let's dive right into it. How's that sound?
Sounds
Sounds
great.
great.
All right. Okay, you guys. So give me examples of times where you were mentored in the past, and how that had an effect on you.
I think my grandparents right out the gate, like having the kind of influence that they had on my life. I think some kids grow up and grandma's house is a place that they go over Christmas or, on a holiday or whatever. But like, I had grandparents that like intentionally poured into me. Like they talked about life, they talked about their faith, they lived their faith out. And I think for me, watching that was incredibly, incredibly influential in my life. They didn't just talk the talk, they walked the walk every single day. And I saw that play out, and it just was so influential in my life. And then I think about like as I entered the workforce and became a young professional. When I was in high school, I worked at a newspaper, and I mean, I was so sheltered and I knew absolutely nothing. And my little newspaper editor came alongside me and I think sheltered me from more bad decisions and saying more dumb things than I ever even realized at the time. And, he recently passed from a heart attack. And I was like kind of reflecting back on that. I'm like, man, that guy really influenced my writing. And I didn't even realize it at the time. And so I think sometimes even in these mentorship conversations, like you don't even realize it's happening to you. And you don't even realize you're doing it in the moment until later on. And I think that's kind of what's cool about it is, you know, you hear these former mentoring programs or this or that, but I think sometimes those best opportunities are just so organic and they happen and you don't even really realize it's going on in the moment, but later you look back and you're like, that is so precious and that is so sweet. And I even think of like as a young professional when I was in the banking industry, I had a bank president that like took me under his wing and I did a whole bunch of babysitting for he and his wife. And now fast forward all these years later, our worlds have reconnected as I'm kind of in a new role as a professional in government. And it is so cool to get to like be in those worlds together now, all these years later. And so you just never know how those dots are all going to be connected. And it's so cool to be at that season in life where you get to look back and go, man, that was neat.
Mhm. And I think, that really brings up a good point. Like, really, as we are going out and functioning as adults, like, we really need to make sure our actions align with what our values are, because you never know who's watching you, who you are impacting, whether you realize it or not. Like, it's just make sure you are walking the walk, not just talking the talk. for sure.
I would say, your mentors will make or break you in your life, your career, everything. I mean, it is imperative. And I've been blessed to have good mentors, thankfully, and there's a lot of people less fortunate than me. And Jimmy Joe, I agree. My grandpas were a huge influence in my life. I mean, Papa Vern is the man that I try to emulate, and just how caring he was, determined, his work ethic, and just how he didn't know a stranger. Um, I mean, he just always held himself to the highest standard at all times and just had a high level of respect for everyone. And then Papa Jim's, Grandpa Jim's faith and how that all plays a part in life, and just, how kind that he was and hardworking. And so all of those things, luckily were poured into me and made me the person that I am and gave me something to shoot at as I came along. And then professionally, I had a great mentorship in college in my grad program with my professors were amazing influences on me. Mr. McKibben, Mr. Sunderland. I mean, they are just absolute legends in this profession. And then, I worked with Brian at Edmond Santa Fe, and just how he treated the patient as a whole and listened to each kid and took his time and checked everything and was thorough. I mean, that that stuck with me my entire career. And then working for the Thunder and how professional those guys are and how they treated each player and the respect that was they showed, but also was given to them because they showed it. And just all of those experiences and how skilled they were with their hands and their ability to figure out things at the highest level, and just the way they operated as a staff were just incredible things for me to be around early in my career.
And I think, we take little bits and pieces from all these people that influence us. And for myself, on the horsemanship side of things, growing up, I didn't have this most stable family life, but luckily I had a neighbor who was a phenomenal horseman, and Sonny and Carol Keene, and I'm probably going to get teary talking about him.
Yeah.
But um, thank God for them. Literally, he was the epitome of the best horseman still to this day that I'd ever been around. And a good heart, a good man. He was younger than my grandparents, but older than my parents. So I don't know if he would have been considered a grandpa or a dad, one or the other, but um, just phenomenal people in how they treated each other, how they treated everyone else, and then how that manifested in their life and their faith. And there's so many times in a day I think about, well, what would Sonny do with this horse? And or how would Carol get ready for a company, to come? And she always had to be ready at a drop of a hat because there'd be people dropping in all the time to come and see their horse, and so just yeah, you can have such a huge impact on people just by showing kindness and caring towards them. And I really think that we as adults need to really carefully think about that and how we are, what's the message that we're sharing with people? Is it that we're trying to find the easiest way out, or find the easiest road to get rich quick, or whatever that is, or who are our idols? Like, good golly, thinking back to when I was a kid, like so many people, they just wanted to, be like whoever it was that was famous, or whatever. Lord knows we don't need any more P. Diddy's in the world. We need more Vern Outmans, we need more Sonny Keens, we need more like Jimmy Joe's grandma and grandpa. And so I think, I really hope there is getting to be a shift in this world where we kind of went to that. We all want to be big rock stars, period, for a while. And now I think there's a lot of people that are realizing we need to be real. We need to be real with people.
And I think it's that idea that, like, when I think about all the mentors that have poured into me, it's that they stopped for me. They stopped for the one. And when I think about how that relates back to my faith, think about what Jesus did. He
Mhm.
always stopped for the one.
Mhm.
He left the 99 to go for the one. He stopped for the woman at the well. Remember when he was in the crowd of people and the woman with the affliction stopped and touched the hem of his garment and he felt the power go out of him? He always stopped for the one. And I was having a conversation with somebody in my professional world recently, and we were just kind of talking about how it's busy, it's intense. This individual was a judge and had lots on their plate and just lots of things going on. And I had made a comment about being busy and something else. And I said, but you know what? If I ever fail to stop for the one, I really hope somebody stops and slaps me, because that's what I'm doing something wrong. And I think that's the difference between, like, idols and those people that are famous and the people like, Grandpa J. Paul and Grandma Millie and the
Mhm.
people that have mentored you guys, is that, like, they stopped for the one. And I watched my grandparents, like, live that out. My grandma was on kidney dialysis for, like, well over a decade. And even in that yucky, hurting, painful time, like, they always stopped for the one that was in maybe not even as bad a shape as grandma was, but they ministered to them. Like, I lost track of how many groceries I saw my grandparents buy for other people or meet those needs. And I'm like, wow. Like, if anybody needed to stop for anybody, it was somebody else that needed to stop for grandma and grandpa, because they probably had a bad day, but they stopped their bad day for the
Mhm.
one. And I
Mhm.
think that's really, at the end of the day, that's really what mentorship is about: is, are we going to push pause for the one? Because we may not be able to change the entire world. You know what? We may not have a million influencers on social media. Like, that should really not be our goal, because we may be doing something that may not be great. But if we change the world for one person, and that person ends up being somebody that does something else, like, that ripple effect, that's real. And,
Mhm.
to your point, Becky, we got to get back to what's real.
Yes. And that's how we build a legacy. And that's, by just stopping and doing those little things for the one, and then that person goes and does little things for someone else, and like you said, the ripple effect, and that's how we make true change. And I love how um pouring into the young people is really where we can make a difference. And like Jimmy Joe, you and I were a little bit longer in the tooth than Destri. Let's face it. And so sometimes we're a little more stubborn in our ways, in our thought processes. But then we think about these young college kids that, hopefully they had a good upbringing. Sometimes they don't. And they're just going out into the world and they're trying to figure out who they are without being told by their parents or somebody else who they are. And so, like, what I mean, they're almost like a blank slate, really. And so I really hope that the actions over the last week um, can shed a light on some of the, I don't know if I want to say toxic teachings at college, but really sometimes there aren't great things taught in college. And um, I hope it really just brings to light, like, having people look at that and having conversations with their kids and having conversations with young adults. Like, what are they going through in school? What are they teaching you in school? And then, is that really what you believe? What are your guys' thoughts on the whole college teachings and whatnot?
I, I think I'm sure Jimmy Joe. I'm sure that you have a ton of experience with all of that going on at the college level, and just from what I've seen, um, you really don't know who your kids are around every day, and they're around them longer than what they're around you probably as a parent. And so that, I always take that with me when I'm treating athletes and stuff like that, is those kids are going to spend some time with me, and what example am I setting for them, and am I making them feel welcome, and is this a place of calm when other places are chaos for them, and what values am I pouring into them, and um being an example of, and that's just all that I can control. But I can't control the stuff that they're seeing on social media or the stuff that they're being taught at home, and so I just try to, you know, really make them feel welcome and show them how how I think a person should conduct themselves, and by my example, and how I talk to them, and the things that come out of my mouth, and the standards that I hold them and other people to. And it's really sad that people are what they are right now and losing their jobs for certain things that they're posting on social media. And the fact of the matter is that there is a consequence, and I think people have lost that. They've lost sight of that. Is your actions, they're going to have consequences, turns out. And that's a fact of this deal.
Yeah. And I guess I think back over my journey of like having been a teacher, having been a mom, having, just to Becky's comment about being long in the tooth, now walking through college with kids. And, just last weekend, kids were at the college rodeo, and we were standing around the trailer, and it was, kind of time to go, go our separate ways. And I'm like, guys, want to get a bite to eat? And so, like, I kid you not, like 4 kids that weren't mine, like we all went and had lunch, but the conversations were so rich. And like, there's this girl there that she's along with the team, and she's just there for emotional support, because come to find out, this one girl has like debilitating anxiety. And we get to talking about that. And like, she's really, really anxious. And she's like, would you just look at my video and tell me what I'm doing wrong? They don't have a coach right now, and nobody's pouring into this girl. And we sit down and we go through it. And she's like, that's it? I'm like, yeah, that's it. And she's like, I can do that. That's not hard. And so like, I mean, it was $100 at the Mexican restaurant to do lunch with all these kids. And it changed the trajectory for them in the moment. And I think that's the important thing to remember, is that like, we never know what a moment is going to do for someone in terms of a kind word, a wise word, hey, don't just blow them off. And it was really interesting in talking to the friend that was along for emotional support. Like, come to find out, this girl has a heart for something that like I'm kind of working in. I'm like, you want to come intern for me? Like, this could be great. And like, just like how you never know how people are going to lead you to people, and you might be able to make a way for someone who otherwise didn't have a way. And I think about back in my life, how over the years, like, people made a way for me when there maybe otherwise wouldn't have been a way. And that's like, I feel like we kind of have that responsibility too, as adults and as mentors, to like, we see something or they say something, to just say, hey, have you ever thought about this? Or, has anybody ever suggested that? And not in a I'm telling you what to believe kind of a way, but just in a, hey, maybe think about this differently. And how that can just really spark that independent thought that like maybe is a little bit lacking in society today. And I think about like, love or hate, whatever the message is out there that's being tied to what happened last week, you cannot fault anybody for wanting to spark independent thought, because that is lacking across society as a whole. And if we can get our kids thinking critically again and trying to solve problems, think about how we'll change the world in that regard. And so I think about those sort of things. And then I also think about like the young moms that I get to pour into too, and how they seem really young now because I'm getting old and long in the tooth. But what a difference that makes for them to think, okay, if I don't completely lose my stuff over this spilled milk, it's not spilled milk. It's an opportunity to teach my kid what grace looks like. And then if I did lose my stuff, it's an opportunity to teach my kid what forgiveness looks like. So I think it's just an opportunity across the board when we're talking to our kids to just really teach some life lessons that they're not learning somewhere else. And then I think too, we were talking about the things that were taught in colleges.
Mhm.
We can't combat all of that, but I also think it's a call for those, whether it's in education or with that education or whatever, to really rise up and take that calling on their life seriously, because we need people that will stand up in that education mountain and be willing to do the right thing. We've seen what happens when you stand up here recently and do the wrong thing. We're finally holding those people accountable. In my
Mhm.
mind, that almost makes the way for those good voices to stand up and have a good platform. And so I know we want to dog on those universities for going woke and doing this and doing that, but did they go that way because they just went that way? Or did they go that way because people like us just were quiet and we didn't speak up? Like, I think we have some piece in that mess too, because we let it happen to a degree. If you look back on the foundation of a lot of these universities that have gone so far off kilter, they were founded on Christian principles.
Mhm.
But we sat back and we didn't let our voices be heard. And well, look at where we're at today.
Yeah, I think so many times we're afraid that we're going to be either, labeled as a racist or a bigot or, whatever we've had kind of shoved down our throats over the years, that we just kind of quieted our voices. And so then the louder voices, the people that are really wanting to, um, you know, get their message out there and their whatever they have going on, they want that to be heard. So then those voices became so loud that we thought that more and more people really felt that way than probably what actually was happening. And I was, you know, as we're getting closer to Gracie going to college, she's a senior in high school, and honestly, we're wrestling back and forth. Like, she's looking at UNL and she's looking at the University of Wyoming, and ideally I'd love to see her go to Wyoming because they're more conservative. She said, when she filled out that application, it said, you know, are you male, female, or prefer not to say? And then when she filled out the application at UNL, it was like 20 different choices, and so I was, there's part of me that is like, oh boy, I'd probably rather have her go someplace that's a little more conservative. But the cool thing was, after this had happened with Charlie, and there was a guy set up on the campus of UNL, and he had a sign that said Charlie deserved it, and he was sitting there in his mask. And guess what the students did? The students went and threw all of his crap in a fountain, and they threw him in there too. And so I think that is awesome that the students are saying we're not going to stand for this. Whether the teachers, the professors, or whatever they're teaching, those kids are standing up for what they believe is right. And so I think, what do you guys think, like, is their kids' biggest struggles, like high school kids, college kids? What do you think their biggest struggles are right now? Do you think it's standing up for what they feel is right? Or what do you think they struggle with the most?
I think it's being empowered with good language. I mean, you think about it. Like, think about, and you alluded to some of it, Becky. Like, think about the language our kids have been fed for the last however long. And like, I pulled this quote up while we were thinking, because, or while we were talking here, because this like really resonated. Somebody posted this the other day, and they said, "What if we replaced 'you are a sexist, racist, fascist, spewing hate' with 'I disagree with your position and here's why'?"
Mhm. Yes.
And I have said for a long time, I don't like when discord is sown, but I really don't like when it's sown because of inflammatory language. Like, there's a way to go about saying things in a loving manner that gets to the bottom of something, that gets the point across. And my kids will constantly say, "Mom, you just told someone to go to hell in a manner that caused them to look forward to the trip." Like, there's this thing called tact and this thing called love, and it can be done. And I really think that, like, in combination with our kids not having a voice, not having a
Mhm.
safe place to ask questions and explore and ask the why, along with like just not having good language to put around some of that. Like we've set them up to fail. We have completely and totally set them up to fail.
Mhm. I
I'm
agree. I
curious what
agree.
Destri sees though in the schools. I think I'm almost 10 years removed from the public school system, so he's way further down in the trenches than I am.
I think that a lot of the time they're fed information and you don't know if it's real or not. And I think, I think a lot of them do have good influences at home and stuff like that. But a lot of the stuff that they see on social media, it's hard to figure out what's real and what isn't. And, one thing that isn't taught and really wasn't taught much when I was growing up is emotional intelligence. I
Mhm.
mean, why are we not making that a part of teaching kids how to deal with that stuff and just be emotionally intelligent people? I mean, I think that emotional intelligence and mental health, just in general, is at an all-time dumpster fire level, and that's where part of this comes from. Is people, we want something to believe in, but we want it so bad that we might just believe in the first thing that somebody tells us instead of doing our own research and figuring out what's right and wrong. And I also think that it starts with, I'm a big believer in, you gotta get your kids in the church and let them make that decision themselves too, and show them that type of example, because I mean, most of this stuff begins and ends, whatever right versus wrong, it begins and ends in the Bible. That's the only self-help book you really need. I mean, it has it all in there, between what's right and wrong and how you need to conduct yourself and all that stuff. Um, I think that needs to be more of a part of things as well.
And I think you hit on something really important there, Destry, with the Bible, that like if we're gonna pour out and we're gonna be mentors, like we as the adults have got to be really refilling ourselves with the good stuff. And like
Mhm.
I have noticed, like if I get away from that, if I get out of my routine, if I am not being solid in that, if I run my radio channels and I am not having good input on my radio when I am driving the thousands of miles that I drive, it comes out. It comes out in how I interact with other people. It comes out in, what I say. It comes out in like, it just comes out. And so I think we also have a responsibility in all of this to make sure that, like, we are sharp as iron for these kids, because we can't pour out and we can't do what's best for them if we're not bringing our best forward. And we know where the very best comes from. It's founded in God's word. And if that isn't the start of everything we do, we're gonna be guilty of leading them astray. And like we know what scripture says, that it's like better to put like a stone around her neck and go jump off a cliff than to lead a kid down a wrong path. And so like we have a tremendous amount of responsibility in that as well.
It's pretty simple. I mean, if you ask yourself, is this post or is this information that I'm about to put out there, would God approve of it? Is this
Mhm.
what a child of God would say about a certain person or situation? If you can answer that question, I I don't see how. I bet that eliminates 90% of the bad stuff out there. If you just can find your own brakes or put a different bit in your mouth and pull, so you can know when to pump the brakes a little bit.
Mhm.
uh I mean, I feel like that would be extremely helpful. It's a simple question. Ask yourself, is this something that a child of God would emulate? And is that what he would want? And 90% of that stuff wouldn't get put out there.
There's days I need a little bit more of that Carrie Kelly gag bit than not.
I need a Hemi sometimes.
Sometimes I need a head setter, if we're being really honest.
Okay, so what about the kids? So I grew up, I mean, we had went to church. Dad got me into church, but like we didn't go on a regular basis. And so honestly, like I was a little bit afraid of doing a ton of things in my younger years in the church because I didn't know the Bible very well. So what if you run into a kid like that? Like, that is kind of searching for something, but they're a little intimidated by doing a Bible study or doing different things because they don't know all of the stories of the Bible. I mean, honestly, the last 2 years, my growth in my knowledge of biblical stories, facts has grown by like 500% at least, just because a good friend invited me to do a Bible study. And so, what do we do for those kids that are maybe in those margins, that yeah, they were taught about God, but maybe not a whole lot. It wasn't a priority. What could we do for those kids?
And I think, I think that a lot of people get turned off by going to church. My wife and I have had this conversation, and it's because the people that go there don't go home and live the word. And so I think through your actions, that's where you start, and holding yourself accountable to actions that line up with those principles. And if you can't hold someone else accountable to it if you're not holding yourself accountable. So I think actions is where it starts and how you conduct yourself.
Yeah, and I think to Destri's point previously, and I'll build on that. I think that's a fabulous comment, Destri. To your point earlier about like, is this a place where they feel welcome? Is this a place where they feel safe? Is this where a place they feel invited? Like being that magnet that draws them in, I think, and creates a place where they even want to have a conversation. But I think also like there's that verse, and I can't think about where it's found. It says, "Be ready always to give an account of the hope that is in you." Like, be that person that causes somebody to go, "Why? Why are you like that? Like, what is it that gives you such peace or such calm or whatever?" And then I think, as we can point to the identity of who Christ is and what he did for us and how that influences who we are, like people are going to want more of that. I think sometimes like this whole idea of sitting in church or being a Christian, like that is so flawed. Like at the end of the day, like we want to live like Jesus, we want to follow Jesus. And I go back to the Bible, like, and I think, as you're starting to introduce, new Jesus followers to that, like getting in the gospel and just like learning how Jesus loved people is so key, to kind of getting people started, I think, more than anything. But to Destri's point, like they're not going to believe it if we don't walk it. And if we don't just like give them a reason to ask why are we different? And really open that conversation up and then point to our identity in him because of who he is and what he did for us, because he's where our hope is at the end of the day.
And you can teach them about faith and belief in good things and hope, and make that your example.
Yeah.
And make that, make them believe in themselves, and make them believe that good things are going to happen to them, and that they can accomplish great things. And just instilling that type of faith and hope in them, I think, is important, because a lot of them don't believe in themselves, or they get told stuff at home like, "Oh, I'm not good enough," or "I'll never be this, I'll never be that." And I think or maybe they just don't believe in themselves. I mean, maybe they have poor self-talk. And I think just being able to emulate faith and positivity and service of others, and giving your best all the time. I mean, we're not perfect, we're going to make mistakes, but hold yourself accountable to that mistake. Just admit that you made a mistake, and it's going to suck to when you're wrong and you make one. But if you hold yourself accountable to it and you admit it, it's going to be a little bit less of a deal than if you run from it, or you lie, or something like that. I feel like people don't hold themselves accountable, so when they get held accountable, then it's like this big shutdown deal. But just own up to it. It's that simple. Own up to your mistake, and then ask for forgiveness and move on with your life.
Yeah. And Becky, you and I have had some conversations just around identity and how like life changing that is when you start to get a hold of the fact that like the power that raised Jesus from the dead lives inside of you if you are a born again believer. And how like Yeah, you should really have no limitations on your life or be doubting yourself once you really like fully grasp and embrace that and live that out. And so I think coming back to that whole identity thing, like because of who he is and what he does, and the fact that that lives in us and that that can live in them too, like that's game changing. That is game changing. And I think when we see kids that are just searching and they're in this like identity crisis, like I read a really sad story the other day about this girl that thought she was something that swam the ocean and was convinced of it and ultimately ended up drowning because she was not that thing. And I'm like, where were the adults here? Like, why did we not intervene and be like, okay, this is not real. Like you're going to drown if, but nobody did, nobody intervened. And so I think just that identity piece and getting a hold of like, hey, the power that raised Jesus from the dead lives inside of me, and he can live inside of you too, makes such a difference to empower our kids, because at the root, they've got to get a hold of who they are to be able to live out, everything they were made to be.
Mhm. I think kids, no matter what age you are, and even us as adults, like we want a sense of belonging. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
And so, like for me, when I was a you know, teenager, I found my sense of belonging with Sonny and Carol. I felt like I was welcome there, I was loved there, and it fed into that horse passion. And thankfully it was a great influence. I think, other kids find that sense of belonging in bad influences, whether it's the wrong crowd, it's the crowd that's drinking and doing drugs and that kind of stuff, but they just want a sense of belonging. And if you don't find that in your family, you're going to go seek it somewhere else. And so I think that's where we, as, outside mentors, we can have them feel loved no matter what, because Jesus loved us no matter what. And God loves us. That's why he sent Jesus for us. So if we can help them realize that they can have a sense of belonging, they can
Mhm.
feel like they are part of something greater, that they aren't going to feel as lost. And, the suicide rates are so astronomically high right now. Like, is it that they are just feeling like they don't belong and that this world is going to be better without them? And so, that has always resonated with me. Like kids are looking for that sense of community. And
Yeah.
so, can we get them into a great community and help them make better decisions that way? And even us adults, like I love my barrel racing community, and I continue to barrel race because I love the ladies at the barrel race. Like you gals are my gals, and Destri, you're that barrel racing support husband.
Absolutely. I
Yes.
take it very serious.
You make a great point about community, Becky. Sorry, I'm teary. I haven't been to a barrel race since the end of June. I miss you like so much. I can't even tell you how much I miss you. But like life wasn't meant to be done in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Life was made to be done in community. And you think about how like the early church was, it was so organic and everybody was just so
Yes.
and our kids are missing that connection. You know what I think about? I'm sitting here, I'm all teary, but like, I miss that connection. And you think about if our kids are isolated or they're buried in their phones, or they don't have a great relationship with their parents, or they feel like they're being bullied and nobody likes them, like how isolating that must feel, and like we're in a vacuum, and how people like you and I, we come alongside and we're like, hey, I see you. Like, that is so great of you that you came along with your friend to be her more emotional support human this weekend. That is so awesome. Like, who does that? That is great. And just even that little word of encouragement can snap them out of that vacuum because they were seen and they were connected. And so yeah, that power of connection. We were not created to do life in a vacuum. We were created for community, and helping create that community is a really big part of that mentorship piece too, I think. Sorry, had a meltdown there. I miss you guys a lot.
Oh, we miss you too. You're doing such important work though, so we understand.
Someday I'm coming back.
We just have to invest more in what we're teaching these kids. And the events that have happened here recently with Charlie Kirk and what's been out there and all the things that have followed, are we really, like, it has shed a lot of light on the good and the evil out there. I mean, the fact that people think it's okay to teach kids that somebody who speaks his mind and wants to have a conversation and is a attentive father and a Christian, that they're glorifying his death in a way that he deserved it. Is that really what we want to teach people? Is that what we're about? Because that's absolutely disgusting. So the people losing their jobs over that deal, that's called a consequence. And and I mean, if I don't know, it's been extremely disappointing to know that evil is out there in positions of power where lawyers, judges, teachers have that viewpoint. And I don't know where those people went so off the rails and wrong, but we better figure it out before this generation does the same thing. And it's definitely there is no way that any decent human should think that that's okay, no matter if you lean a little this way or a little that way. Somebody losing their life over free speech and nonviolence who was unarmed, there's no way that should be glorified, not a chance.
Yeah.
I think, it's important, if we see any good out of it, is it's shedding the light on that darkness. And so we can either weed that out or, you know, I think it's great to see what those people really do think. They're not just hiding and lurking in the shadows anymore. It shed light on that. So to me, I'm almost thankful to know that if that's what those people were thinking and seeing, that now we know that, and it called them out, and it's absolutely horrible, but that may have had to happen to expose that evil and expose that um thinking. And yeah, I totally hope they get all the consequences for their actions on that. They need to have severe consequences for acting like that.
But I think as we think about the positive actions that come out of this, Becky, you made a comment the other day when you and I were talking, and we were talking about, like, we're tired of diluted messages. Like, we want our words to have power. We want to be able to speak, what's truly on our hearts. And, like, I would say that's been ignited.
Yeah.
As I, like, these last couple of weeks have been really hard because there's been some crossover in that world that, like, has just really kind of stopped me in my tracks. And, like, I feel like I look over my shoulder a lot now, and I did not do that before. But at the same time, it's like, it really kind of ticked me off. And, I've been fairly outspoken in my faith. I don't really pull any punches about where I stand, but I think it's maybe even emboldened me a little bit more to be like, oh yeah, watch me now.
Yeah.
And I think even the conversations I've had with my kids, this just broke my heart. Within a little bit of this happened, and my son reached out to me and he's like, Mom, are you okay? I'm like, I'm fine, honey. I'm fine. Like, it's fine. What's going on? And he's like, Mom, the guy stood up for babies.
Yeah.
23-year-old kid knew. And I think, you know what? We have a responsibility, I think, as mentors and adults in this, to model for these kids what it looks like to get this right. And I was visiting with a dear friend of mine. I'm like, this is so uncomfortable. Like, I don't like to be at the front of the room. I don't like to post on social media. Like, those are things I really don't like to do. But it's necessary because we got to model for them what it looks like to do it right and get it right. Because when we do that, then they have the model to follow and they're not being distracted by the bad stuff.
Mhm. Yeah. Our voices have to be as loud as the bad voices or louder, you know. And I think we tend not to because, you know, whatever reason. And we've been the quieter bunch, but we're not because we're the minority. We are the majority, and we have to make sure that we show what we believe in.
Because I think sometimes it's hard to put language around those things and do it in a loving way. And I think that's why our society has become so polarized, is because it's just easier to yell louder than to get your message funneled down in a way that is actually loving. And you like think about that passage in I think it's in Ephesians 4, where it talks about like the mature believer and what how that plays out and what that looks like. And like it talks about speaking that truth in love. And we're doing it because we love people. Like we don't want them to fall away. We don't want them to end up in a sinner's hell. We want them to have a good place in eternity. Like we want all of those good things. And it comes from a place of love, not from a place of hate. And I don't think people understand that sometimes. Even modeling tough conversations for our kids. I don't know that we do that a lot. It was interesting. I was listening to a USDA rural development hearing today on YouTube, and they were talking about how like we get it right a lot of the times in our rural communities because we're one of the few places left on earth that we can sit down across the table from somebody that we absolutely do not agree on something with, but we can figure out how to make it work in our communities. And I think we need to expose our kids to those opportunities to disagree respectfully and be able to make progress on something that we maybe, but it's got to be done. Like at the end of the day, like if your water infrastructure is crumbling and nobody has good water, and I understand you don't want to spend any money, but we're all going to have bad water if we don't do something. We have to come together. And so I think about like, we have to give these kids a safe place to disagree and even just practice some of those things, if we want them to be able to get that piece right too.
Well, that's where I think, you know, getting them in those, like you said, those places, but taking them with you, like doing all of those things and having them right there beside you, seeing you have difficult conversations, having them with you when or having that dialogue and having that discussion, which is hard. It's hard as a parent to have people, you know, to have your kids there when sometimes you're doing things that aren't very fun for kids, you know, but um just being there by their side as they go through things as well and trying to have conversations. How do you handle a challenging conflict with a friend at school or somebody that you thought was your friend and you know, just really really working on trying to have an open dialogue as much as possible. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard. I even thought that this week with Gracie. She's not my talker. Emma's my talker, you know, and Gracie will come home and she's just quieter. And so, but you know, just being there. Like last night she was going to run to North Platte and I'm like, "You know what? I'm going to go with you." And just having that time in the car together, and maybe we didn't talk a whole lot, but at least we were there. And when the conversations did start flowing, then they did, you know. And so um like you said, just kind of making time for that one and trying to be there, even if it's just to listen or to just show the support. That's the important part. And kind of Destry, like you were talking about, you know, how do we help teach emotional intelligence to our kids? Do you guys have ideas on that?
Buddy, I'm still a work in progress on the emotional intelligence. I'm not gonna lie to you. I at least have awareness. So I think maybe it starts there, just making them aware if that's a thing, and definitely try to learn to process things and let them go through hard stuff. I think that we try to protect kids so much, and I don't have kids, so but I was one at one time, and so um, you got to let them go through hard things and have hard conversations and not run from it or take them under your wing all the time. I mean, I'm not saying that there's not things that you should protect them from. There definitely is, but um, accountability and letting them do hard stuff, I think, and letting them work the problem themselves a little bit, I think will help them down the road rather than, you know, taking the reins all the time and being that helicopter.
Well, and I think just giving them that safe place to fail if they need to fail, like that is really okay. And then like asking them to name what's going on. Like, okay, you seem a little bit agitated, or are you angry about this? Like, tell me what's going on with that. Like, where do you feel that in your body? That feels like a really weird question to ask, but you think about like, okay, when trauma settles in your hips or like stress settles in your neck and your shoulders, like if we can start to name what those emotions are and how they're settling in our body and how they start to have an impact on us, if we get a hold of that sooner with our kids, we would save a lot of problems long term. No offense, it would probably put you guys out of some business. We don't want to have that happen, but like thinking about how that does like manifest itself long term in people. And I know I've done a lot of work with itty bitties kind of in that birth to age 3 space, and even just like getting them to help us understand like, hey, I'm angry, hey, I'm upset, like, hey, I'm sad. Being able to name emotions even early on is really important, and we don't do a good job about that at all. We want to jump to naming letters, colors, numbers, adding, subtracting, doing all this academic stuff, which is great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't want an illiterate society that can't read, but like if you're mad and you stomp off and you can't carry on a conversation, I really don't care how great you can add and subtract and do something on a spreadsheet if you cannot interact on a social level with a team.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, and I don't know that it would put us out of business. Maybe it would help us do our business better.
Very, very
Maybe it
true.
would help us help people
Help people
more.
more. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I don't know. I think to your point there, Destri, awareness is everything. And then being able to put good language around it. Like, what is it? What is it that I am feeling? Like, really being able to break that down and process it. And I think, too, our society is just so input, 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 input. There's very little margin for downtime and space to just be quiet and listen and like be alone with your thoughts and be alone with your emotions. Like I know last week was just such a hard week with everything that went down. I was really avoiding being alone with my emotions, and finally when I did, I was like, man, this was like I needed to do it, but like it was just hard to do. And I think we get so wrapped up in being busy, it's kind of a convenient escape from having to deal with some of that sometimes too.
Mhm. Yeah, I was up in Minnesota at my mom's while all of this was kind of unraveling, and she had the constant news on, so I heard every bit of all of this stuff. And I'm not a TV person. Like I rarely turn on my TV at home, and I kind of shelter myself from a lot of news, which I know is not great, but I kind of have to control what comes in. And it really affects, like you said, when you have that constant bombarding of information and la 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 la, like you do just have to shut everything off and just, how are you handling it? How are you processing that? And it was wonderful. I went out on our deck and I just sat out there and it was quiet. I heard, all the great Minnesota wildlife, but um I don't think we do that enough, and allowing people to have that quiet space that they can just unplug for a little bit and figure out what they need for sure. Hmm.
thank you all for listening. Thank you, Jimmy Joe, for coming on here and being a part of this conversation. And it's just one that needs to happen more often between everybody on both sides. So thank you all for listening. And as always, let your health be the pivot point to your success.